In the autumn of 1942, the naval world was shaken when, within a short period of time, 24 out of 36 vessels, including large transport ships and Allied escort vessels, were rapidly sunk by the guns of a killer from Germany. It was a true ocean monster, fast, powerful, and overwhelmingly intimidating. Prime Minister Winston Churchill declared it Britain's #1 target for destruction. This aggressive predator, nicknamed the Enemy of God, was none other than the battleship Tirpitz, the pride and symbol of Nazi Germany's navy. After its defeat in the First World War, the German Empire was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. The treaty imposed extremely harsh terms, placing severe restrictions on Germany's military rearmament. The German Navy was reduced to a largely symbolic force and was prohibited from building submarines or warships exceeding 10,000 tons in displacement. By 1930, as Adolf Hitler rose to prominence as Germany's so-called savior, he began planning the restoration of naval power. In March 1935, Germany announced its withdrawal from the Treaty of Versailles, an agreement that had long constrained the size and strength of its fleet. Even before officially leaving the treaty, Adolf Hitler and Germany's senior naval commanders had secretly drafted a strategy known as Plan Z, aimed at constructing a super battleship larger than any Germany had ever possessed, with power intended to surpass that of the world's leading naval powers. The battleship Tirpitz became the largest, most powerful, and ultimately the most hunted warship of the Nazi German Navy. It was the second vessel of the Bismarck-class battleships, built for the German Navy during World War II. The ship was named after Admiral Adolf von Tirpitz, who played a crucial role in rebuilding and shaping the Nazi German Navy into one of the most formidable naval forces in the world. This massive maritime behemoth began design and construction at the Kriegsmarine Werft Wilhelmshaven shipyard in November 1936. Alongside its sister ship, Bismarck, Tirpitz was one of the 2 battleships with the largest hulls ever built by Germany, surpassing all other European warships of its time. On April 1, 1939, a formal launching ceremony was held. The ship was christened by Ursula von Hassel, the daughter of Admiral Adolf von Tirpitz. The ceremony was attended by Admiral Adolf von Trotha, a former admiral of the Imperial German Navy, as well as Adolf Hitler himself. From the start of her trials and evaluation period until February 1941, British bombers repeatedly attacked the harbor where the ship was moored. Although none of the bombs struck Tirpitz directly, these air raids significantly delayed her completion. On February 25, 1941, Tirpitz was formally commissioned into the fleet and sent out to conduct sea trials. Shortly afterward, the ship was transferred to Kiel, where it underwent intensive training exercises in the Baltic Sea. The Royal Air Force could not afford to stand by idly and continued to launch bombing raids against Tirpitz while she was stationed there. However, due to Germany's dense and well-organized air defense network, all of these attacks failed. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, Germany launched its invasion of the Soviet Union. Tirpitz's first operational assignment was to serve as the flagship of the German Navy, deployed to intercept Soviet naval forces in the Baltic Sea. In practice, however, the overwhelming superiority of the German Luftwaffe quickly sank most Soviet warships, leaving Tirpitz's main guns without any opportunity to fire. In May 1941, following the loss of Bismarck, one of Germany's 2 most powerful super battleships, the German Naval High Command was forced to change its strategy. Adolf Hitler issued a direct order forbidding Tirpitz from venturing into the dangerous waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Instead, in November 1941, the ship was redeployed northward to Norwegian waters, tasked with attacking Allied supply convoys delivering aid to the Soviet Union. The transfer was carried out under conditions of absolute secrecy. Tirpitz was anchored close to a sheer rock face inside a fjord and concealed using artificial smoke screens. The anchorage was heavily defended, protected by 20 anti-aircraft guns and anti-torpedo nets deployed at the entrance. From November 16, 1941, Tirpitz was moored in Trondheim Fjord, a narrow fjord stretching approximately 130 kilometers along the northern coast of Norway. However, just 6 days later, the British had already identified her location. The Royal Navy fully understood the threat Tirpitz posed, having witnessed the devastation caused by Bismarck. Now, her sister ship, larger and even more powerful, had become the top priority threat. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill issued a clear order. Tirpitz had to be destroyed at all costs. And so, the hunt for Germany's super battleship officially began, a pursuit that would last nearly 3 years. In March 1942, German command received intelligence regarding 2 Allied supply convoys bound for the Soviet Union, codenamed PQ-12 and QP-8. PQ-12 departed from Iceland for Murmansk with 16 cargo ships, while QP-8 was en route back to Britain. On March 5th, Tirpitz sailed from Fjord, accompanied by 3 escorting destroyers, launching her first combat sortie in an attempt to intercept the convoys. However, extremely poor weather conditions severely limited reconnaissance aircraft operations, preventing both sides from locating each other. Even so, German destroyers managed to detect a Soviet merchant vessel and sank it on March 19th. Shortly thereafter, British reconnaissance aircraft finally detected Tirpitz's movement. 12 Fairey Albacore torpedo bombers were immediately dispatched, flying at low altitude and using cloud cover to achieve the element of surprise. However, the attack was ill-fated. As the British aircraft approached the target, they were detected, completely losing the element of surprise. Forced to launch their torpedoes from long range, while Tirpitz had already brought her dense anti-aircraft defenses into action, the attacking aircraft were driven back. All aggressive attack runs were repelled, and the ship successfully avoided every dangerous close-range approach. The hunt ended in failure, forcing the Royal Air Force to withdraw. Tirpitz was subsequently moved back to Trondheim Fjord, where she was anchored in a small inlet surrounded by sheer rock cliffs and thick fog, making her an exceptionally difficult target to attack. Driven by a determination to hunt her down at all costs, the British pressed on. On March 31, 1942, 32 Halifax heavy bombers were launched in a large-scale bombing raid against Tirpitz. However, poor weather and treacherous terrain meant that only 1 aircraft managed to locate the target and attack, dropping a single 1,800-kilogram bomb and 4 bombs weighing just over 200 kilograms each. All of them missed. In return, Tirpitz's anti-aircraft fire shot down 6 British aircraft. Afterward, the Royal Navy continued to organize multiple follow-up attacks aimed at destroying the German super battleship, but none achieved any meaningful results. In total, the British lost 12 out of 107 aircraft deployed, merely inflicting minor superficial damage on the ship. Meanwhile, the Eastern Front grew increasingly brutal. Allied supply convoys to the Soviet Union along the northern route continued to increase in scale. On June 27, 1942, convoy PQ-17, consisting of 35 merchant vessels carrying more than 200,000 tons of cargo, departed from Iceland. 3 days later, the convoy was detected by a German submarine. On July 2nd, the battleship Tirpitz, together with the heavy cruiser Admiral Scheer and 6 destroyers, sailed north to intercept the supply convoy. By July 4th, after receiving intelligence about the pursuit by German heavy surface units, the British Admiralty realized that with Tirpitz involved, the Allied escort cruisers stood little chance. As a result, the British Naval Command made a highly controversial decision. The escort forces were ordered to withdraw westward, and the merchant convoy was instructed to continue toward the Soviet Union on its own, on the grounds that the remaining distance was not far. This decision forced the Soviet Navy to attempt to protect the remaining merchant ships using aircraft, destroyers, and submarines. A Soviet reconnaissance aircraft detected Tirpitz's position and transmitted a report. However, German intelligence intercepted and decrypted the message, realizing that their position had been exposed. Unwilling to take unnecessary risks, German High Command immediately ordered Tirpitz to return to her base in Norway. Even so, the fate of PQ-17 was far from over. German command altered its plan, ordering submarines and aircraft to destroy the convoy instead. The result was catastrophic. 22 Allied ships were sunk and only 11 vessels succeeded in reaching the Soviet Union. Although Tirpitz never directly engaged in combat, her mere presence and terrifying reputation was enough to force the Allied escorts to withdraw, creating ideal conditions for a decisive German victory. The PQ-17 disaster dealt a severe blow to the credibility of the Royal Navy's ability to control the seas and protect Allied convoys. Tirpitz was ordered to return to Trondheim Fjord for a major overhaul, partly out of fear and partly still bitter over the PQ-17 disaster. The British had no intention of abandoning their efforts to eliminate this maritime threat. In October 1942, the Royal Navy devised a bold plan to sink Tirpitz. Fishing vessels would tow large warhead torpedoes close to the ship. However, due to technical failures, the towing cable snapped and the torpedoes were lost at sea before they could reach the target, causing the plan to fail. After this setback, the British launched a new operation, one even bolder and more reckless. They decided to penetrate Germany's extremely tight underwater defenses and place two 2-ton explosive charges beneath Tirpitz's hull. Reaching the ship was anything but easy. The surrounding waters were protected by minefields, dense anti-submarine nets, and round-the-clock patrols. To overcome these defenses, the British chose to deploy 10 X-class midget submarines, each approximately 15 meters long. The operation began in September 1943. Due to mechanical failures at sea, only 3 midget submarines managed to reach the German anchorage. Nevertheless, through exceptional courage and skill, they slipped through the defensive nets and successfully placed their explosive charges near Tirpitz's hull. Shortly afterward, 2 massive explosions inflicted severe damage on the ship. Although the operation was a tactical success, all 3 midget submarines were detected. One was sunk by German fire with its entire crew, while the other 2 were captured. This marked the first time the British achieved real success against Tirpitz. While they failed to destroy the ship outright, they rendered her inoperable for an extended period. The Germans were forced to deploy large forces to protect the surrounding waters, and Tirpitz was towed back to a shipyard for repairs. 6 months later, Tirpitz returned to service and was once again ready for operations. As soon as the Royal Navy received this information, determined to eliminate the threat once and for all, a new plan was immediately put into motion. On April 3, 1944, upon learning that Tirpitz was conducting sea trials and training exercises, 87 British aircraft, including 40 Barracuda dive bombers armed with armor-piercing bombs weighing between 250 and 730 kilograms, along with 40 escort fighters, were ordered to strike in 2 waves. The first attack began at 5:29 a.m. Taking full advantage of surprise, British aircraft dived from altitude, raking the target with machine gun fire and bombs. Moments later, the bombers followed through, releasing armor-piercing bombs with devastating power. The second wave commenced at 6:30 a.m. Having lost the element of surprise, British aircraft encountered fierce German anti-aircraft resistance. With no other option, they were forced to bomb from higher altitude, significantly reducing accuracy. After approximately 2 minutes, the second attack ended. Over the course of the operation, the Royal Navy scored 15 direct bomb hits, killing 122 German personnel and wounding another 316. The British lost 4 aircraft and 9 pilots. In just a few short minutes, 6 months of repair work was undone, delivering a crushing blow to the morale of Tirpitz's crew. Most bitter of all, the ship, freshly repaired, was once again forced back into the shipyard to address the damage. However, the British were still not satisfied. They continued to launch multiple air raids against Tirpitz, but none of these attacks caused significant damage. By September, the mission to destroy the ship was handed over to the heavy bomber squadrons of the Royal Air Force. This time, the RAF deployed Lancaster bombers armed with the 5.4-ton Tallboy bomb, specifically designed to penetrate the heavy armor of battleships. The first attack took place on September 15, when a bomber operating from the Soviet Union struck the bow of Tirpitz with an underwater detonation. The explosion caused severe damage, rendering the ship incapable of putting to sea. Facing this situation, the German Naval High Command decided against conducting full repairs and instead chose to use Tirpitz as a stationary floating fortress. The ship was moved approximately 200 nautical miles to northern Norway for temporary repairs. Unbeknownst to her crew, this would be the final journey of Tirpitz's career. On November 12, 1944, the British launched Operation Catechism. At approximately 9:35 a.m., 32 Lancaster bombers from No. 9 and No. 617 squadrons approached the target. Once again, Tirpitz fired her 380mm guns in defense, forcing the bomber formation to temporarily disperse. However, the ship's anti-aircraft fire was unable to stop the attack. The 32 Lancasters dropped a total of 29 Tallboy bombs. 2 scored direct hits. The first penetrated the armored deck and detonated inside a boiler room. The second shattered the belt armor along the ship's side, blasting open a large section of the hull. Seawater rushed in rapidly, causing catastrophic damage. A massive explosion shook the entire ship. Tirpitz began to list, then capsized, and finally sank to the seabed. More than 950 sailors went down with the vessel. Approximately 200 survivors were rescued by German ships and later transferred to the heavy cruiser Lutzow in January 1945. One of Nazi Germany's most powerful warships had been decisively defeated. Yet even in death, Tirpitz's legacy endured. Her mere presence had been enough to severely constrain and threaten Allied supply convoys in the North Atlantic for years. Tirpitz had tormented the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, consuming vast amounts of Allied resources. Ironically, the relentless advancement of military technology, especially the overwhelming power of air superiority, had transformed Tirpitz from a feared ocean predator into a warship forced to spend most of her existence hiding and fleeing.